And if I can do no more than just say this to you, that I have many regrets in my life, but I have never once regretted in my life taking Jesus Christ as my Savior. It was the grandest thing I ever did. In giving one's testimony, where does one start? Well, where does salvation start? I can look back to the time when I trusted the Savior, but if you were to ask me concerning God's dealings with me prior to that, I would have to go back a long way. And so I wonder if I may share something, not just of my testimony, but maybe something of my history. My father was gassed in the First World War, and I don't remember very much of my father, although I was a lad old enough to understand when he did pass away. I was actually in the room when he passed from this sea. Up to that moment, we've known something of poverty. A pension that wasn't enough to keep him, let alone keep a family. My home was as red as a home could possibly be without being actually a communistic home. And yet I thank God for all that we learned from Mum. We were not raised to go to a church where the gospel was preached, but I learned things from that little mother of mine that have stood me in good stead and will stand me until I get home to face the Lord. Ours was a home that knew poverty. I was a boy, how I hated it. Going to school with shoes that had been purchased in a jumble sale. And when they were worn out, Mum used to send us to the dump to come back with an old tire. And she herself, with her own hands, would cut out the rubber to sole and heel those shoes. And how I hated it. I know this, that if I learnt anything when I was a boy, I learnt that we lived within our means. And if we couldn't afford it, we didn't have it. On Saturday I used to go round and get people's washing and bring it back, and my mum used to do the washing. And then I had to go and collect the money, and I put my foot in the door, and I wouldn't leave until I said, please, I'll have it. I'll have it now. You won't send it round. That if we had poverty before Father died, we had it up. When as a lad of 13 and a half, a big lad, but of 13 and a half, I decided I had to do something. I ran away from home. I went up to Salisbury. It was the great sheep market. Indeed, the fairground, and all the hurdy-gurdies and the things that go with it. And I thought somehow or the other I'll get myself a job. I went down on the fairground and went from one booth to another until I came outside of a boxing booth. A man that I grew to know and in some measure appreciate so much, for I travelled with them for so many years afterwards. Old Sammy McCurran had some of his boys out to the front and was offering them to the crowd. And I remember just as a lad standing and looking and saying, "Why, I'd like to have a go at him." But I didn't ask for the gloves, but as soon as the show was over, I went up to him and I said, "Mister, is there any chance of a fight?" And he looked at me and he said, "Can you fight, son?" "Well, I'll have a go at you if you like and you can see." Well, he said, "Jump up." As I said, I'd held the British Federation Championship. I couldn't tell him that, because if I did, he would have found out how old I was. And he looked at me and said, "How old are you, son?" I said, "I'm 16. Well, he said, "What do you want, a fight or a job?" I said, "I'd like a job, sir." Well, he said, "I'll give you a job. You'd like to travel with us, you can travel with us. I'll give you 5 shillings a week and you keep." And I started my first job. I remember they gave me my first 5 shillings. It was a good job it was Sunday. I'd have bought up Salisbury with it. I put half a crown in a package and sent it home to my mum and a little note to tell her not to worry. I only know this, but just as a lad, I travelled from one fair to another, fighting a boy whenever he wanted to fight, fighting a man sometimes, but doing odd jobs about the fair. But of course, we do get winter in England. After Barnstable Fair, it was over, and I went home. And when Mum said you came in at 10:30, you came in at 10:30. There was no argument. And I was thrilled when the next year came, and off I went again. Now I carried on like this year after year, enjoying every moment of my life, but living as rough as a man can live. And if there's some of you think you've lived rough, you don't know what it means. I owe everything to Jesus Christ. I owe not only the salvation of my soul to Him, I owe everything I have to Him. But the time rolled by. And one day, as a young fellow, maybe 21 years of age, maybe a little more, one Saturday night I went down into the pub where I drank. I was leaning against the bar, laughing, joking with some of the fellows, just enjoying their company, when suddenly the door opened, and a little Salvation Army lassie came in, complete with poke bonnet and war cry. And she went from one to another, and she said, "Will you buy a war cry?" And she came to me and said, "Will you buy a war cry?" And I looked at her, and with a grin all over my face, I said, "I'll be very happy to buy a war cry, missy. Will you sing us a song?" I never thought she would. But she put me on the spot and said, "Yes, I'll sing a song. Will you ask the men to be quiet?" Oh dear. I didn't mind the girl singing a hymn, but I didn't want to be the chairman of a religious meeting in the pub where I used to drink. But she put me on the spot, and I turned to a crowd of cursing, drinking, story-telling men. And I said, "Fellas, will you be quiet? The girl's going to sing." She jumped up on the table in the public bar, the Five Ways Hotel, away yonder in Bournemouth. She sang, "On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. And I stood and looked at her. I tried to make her look foolish, and she'd made me look foolish. I was not converted then, but that was the start in my life. For I looked up into the face of a girl that had more backbone than I had. But here was a girl who was prepared to stand in front of a crowd of cursing men and witness to the fact that as far as she was concerned, Jesus was real. I didn't even drink a pint of beer. I left it on the bar and I walked out and I made my way home. But that day, God started a work in my life. And I have never from that day to this got away from the fact that here was a little girl willing to sing for Jesus in a pub. The time passed by, but they erected this tent right opposite the pub where I used to drink. And one evening I was walking over the hill and I leaned against the fence, for the singing was coming out of the tent. And I must say this, it sounded very good. And then I heard the preacher said, "We will commence the service with," and I was gone. But one evening I walked down over the hill and the singing hadn't started, so I walked up over Charminster Road Hill. And as I was going up over the hill, a young lady was coming down. She had in her hand what I found out later was a bundle of tracts. I didn't know what they were. They could have been £5 notes. But every person in front of me, she would stop in front of them and offer them one of these things, whatever they were, and speak to them. And eventually she came to me and she said, "We're just going to start a service in the big tent at the bottom of the hill. I wonder if you'd be kind enough to come." "What, me?" "Yes," she said, "yes." "No, I don't want to go. Thank you very much." But this young woman could keep on. No, I know what I'm talking about. I've been married to her for 28 years. But there it is. You know, she could keep on. And, well, eventually I got into the tent. I sat in the back. Oh, I had a wonderful week. I had a wonderful week. I sat there. I can't remember a word, really, the preacher said. I wasn't interested in him. Why, I was sitting there in the tent looking around and seeing everyone that was there. Cool, he comes. I should tell you something about him. What, her? Oh, she ought to be here, too. You know the sort of thing you talk about when you know everyone that's there. And when it was over, I went out. But there was one thing just that struck me. As I went in, they gave me a hymn book. And they hadn't given me a hymn book, well, hardly out of their hands, before the young fellow that gave me the hymn book was right up the front and he was getting hold of the preacher. Do you know why? The tent mission was run by the little gospel hall, where maybe it could have been 5 years before, for 5 minutes, I'd gone to a Bible class. And for all those years, they prayed for me. And now I walk into the tent where they were having services. No wonder they went and told the preacher. Well, I went night after night. And I didn't know what was happening. Beyond this, that all the time, deep within my heart, I began to get terribly ashamed of myself, convicted of sin, until one evening I decided I would finish it forever. I went into the tent with but one idea, that I'd have it out with a preacher. And as soon as the service was over, I went right up to this preacher and I said to him, "Mr. Cyril, you don't believe that nonsense you've been talking about, do you?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, young man, it's not nonsense and I do believe it. I'm glad that day I met a man who not only knew his God, but he knew his Bible." And he began to tell me that I was a sinner. He told me that I'd come short of the glory of God. He told me that God was holy and righteous, and God hated my sin. But the wonder was, He loved me. The wonder was that though God hated all the despicable things I'd done and said, and all that I'd planned that was opposed to His mind, He loved me. He sent His Son to die on Calvary's cross for me. Do you know what happened? I remembered a little Salvation Army lassie on the opposite side of the road who sang, "For a world of lost sinners." The only thing I remembered about the hymn, "For a world of lost sinners," was slain. And the preacher told me that I could be forgiven of the sin if I trust my life to God. That night, I sank down on my knees. I said, "Oh, God, I'm a sinner saved. Come now, has Christ saved you? Have you yielded your life to Him? Are you willing to tonight?"